I've come here to Reddit to admit a shameful secret and seek advice on something that has been troubling me for too long. My name is Sarah, and I'm a 32-year-old woman living in a lovely house in the suburbs of Chicago. I'm married to an amazing man, Jack. Jack is the type of person who can walk into a room and instantly earn respect, not by giving orders or bragging about his achievements, but simply by his presence, integrity, and hard-earned success. He owns a prosperous IT company and treats me exceptionally well. Even after 3 years of marriage, the spark between us is still strong. His eyes still light up when he sees me, and our nights are filled with love and passion. He's not only financially secure, but also emotionally mature, considerate, and treats me with respect and kindness. However, despite all of this, I made a terrible mistake. Before Jack, I was married to Mike, who was like a wild storm, unpredictable and incredibly exciting, but ultimately destructive. Mike was never successful in the conventional sense. He held odd jobs, spent his nights in pool halls and bars, and sometimes got into fights. He had a charming, mischievous smile that could win over even the sternest hearts. Mike, then and now, is a motorcyclist. His bad boy persona wasn't just an act. He was the guy in leather, riding a Harley, getting into bar fights. A person who lived life on the edge, always flirting with disaster but somehow managing to bounce back. You might be wondering, how did I ever fall for someone like Mike? I suppose part of it was the excitement of unpredictability, the exhilarating feeling of living without rules. But the truth is, I was young and easily impressed by his apparent rebelliousness. Our marriage, as you can imagine, was a wild ride with extreme highs and devastating lows. It ended predictably, with a flurry of arguments, tears, and plenty of regret. When I met Jack, it felt like waking up from a long and tumultuous dream. Here was a man who was everything Mike wasn't: stable, successful, mature, and respectful. He was the calm after the storm. I fell for him instantly, and I believed I had finally found my happily ever after. But it seems the past has a knack for resurfacing at the most unexpected times. It was at a charity event, something Jack and I frequently attended, that I unexpectedly crossed paths with Mike. There he stood in his weathered leather jacket, amidst a crowd dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, looking entirely out of place yet unapologetically himself. His mischievous grin hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown even more captivating over time. As we had a couple of drinks, old memories resurfaced, and the excitement I had once felt rushed back to me. I let myself get carried away in the moment, drawn in by his daring charm, and that's when it happened. We ended up at his shabby apartment, a place filled with the scent of motor oil and whiskey. I cheated on Jack. From that point on, I was overwhelmed with guilt and remorse. What was I thinking? Why did I allow myself to be swayed by the illusion of a past that brought more pain than pleasure? Mike, with his chaotic lifestyle, stood in stark contrast to the calm, reassuring stability that Jack provided me. Jack is everything I desire in a life partner. He's supportive, kind, strong, and successful. Most importantly, he loves and respects me. But the memory of that evening with Mike has been tormenting me, gnawing at my conscience and filling my heart with dread. The worst part? I believe Jack suspects something. He's been unusually quiet since I came home late that night, claiming to have lost track of time while shopping. His silence is overwhelming and it terrifies me. Jack isn't the type to confront someone without evidence. However, I can sense that something has shifted. I'm in a tough spot. Should I come clean with Jack, risking our years of trust? Or should I keep this awful secret, hoping he remains unaware, living with this guilt forever? I know I messed up and I deeply regret it, but I'm terrified, and I could really use your guidance. What's the right course of action? Reddit, what would you do if you were in my situation? Now, for my first update, it's Sarah again, with some developments to share. Things have taken a darker turn. Jack's suspicions are growing, and he's started probing into the night I claimed to have been shopping. His questions are logical and reasonable, the kind anyone would ask if they doubted their partner's faithfulness. But to me, they feel like sharp arrows, each one digging deeper into my guilt-ridden heart. He requested the shopping receipts, which caught me off guard, and I hastily came up with the first excuse that popped into my head. I had paid in cash and tossed the receipts. It was a flimsy explanation, and his skeptical look made it clear he didn't buy it. I felt like I was walking on thin ice, and I was well aware of it. Then, he inquired about any other evidence of my whereabouts that night, sending my heart racing. It was as if he were following the breadcrumbs of my lie, inching closer to the painful truth. I muttered something about not having my phone with me while shopping, adding another falsehood to the crumbling facade. Then he hit me with a bombshell. He asked for my Google login to check my map history. My heart sank as I recalled using Google Maps that ill-fated night to find Mike's dingy apartment. In a moment of panic, I chose to act defensive, questioning his trust and intentions, and it led to a minor argument. It wasn't a proud moment for me, but fear and guilt had me tightly in their grip, and I felt trapped. He was persistent, not aggressive, but resolute in his request. Eventually, I relented but deliberately provided him with the wrong password, hoping to buy some time. Since then, I've been avoiding Jack, immersing myself in work and errands, anything to keep me away from the house and another confrontation. But I can't hide forever. Sooner or later, he'll ask for the correct password, and then I'll run out of excuses. I'm living in fear, Reddit. I've created a complete mess. Now, I find myself in a situation where the truth could utterly shatter my world. I'm terrified of losing Jack, of losing the life I've always dreamed of, the life we've built together. I'm terrified by the idea that my terrible mistake might completely disrupt my life. The guilt is consuming me, and the fear of getting caught is paralyzing. I still need your assistance, Reddit. I value your advice and perspectives. What's the right course of action here? Should I confess before he discovers the truth himself? Or should I remain silent and hope for the best? Is there even a correct way to navigate this situation? This is Sarah, back one last time with a heavy heart and a story that hasn't ended well. The inevitable happened sooner than I anticipated. Jack uncovered everything, not through a confrontation or my confession, but through the unfeeling tracking of Google Maps. He saw my location on that fateful night, those 3 hours at Mike's apartment. He knew I had realized the truth the morning I got up early to make Jack breakfast before his usual commute, but he had already left. All that remained was a note on the kitchen counter, a painful and poignant explanation that he knew everything, that he had seen it all. His attorney and the divorce papers were on their way. As I read the note, it felt like my heart was being squeezed in a vice. I could hardly breathe, and the room seemed to spin around me. The letter slipped from my trembling hands, falling to the floor, mirroring the collapse of my world. I collapsed to the ground, tears pouring down my face, the harsh reality of my actions hitting me like a powerful force. I tried everything, Reddit. I called him, sent text messages, wrote letters, all in a desperate attempt to explain, apologize, and beg for his forgiveness. But it was all futile. Jack remained unresponsive, as unmovable as a statue. He didn't react to any of my efforts to reach out. He had always been a man of few words, and now his silence spoke volumes. Every moment of it served as a painful reminder of the trust I had shattered. The cold, emotionless demeanor he had adopted towards me was a stark contrast to the warmth and love he had once shown. Now, I'm in search of a place to rent. The alimony I receive isn't much, although Jack was more than fair. It will only cover a modest apartment, a far cry from the beautiful home we had created. I already miss it deeply. The aroma of fresh coffee in the mornings, the sound of Jack playing the piano, the quiet conversations we shared at the dinner table, and the dream of starting a family soon. This loss brings tears to my heart. The vision of raising a child in our lovely home, sharing our love with our little one, has been shattered. I've taken that dream away from him, from us. I bear the responsibility for not only ruining our present, but also our future. I conclude this post with a heavy heart, burdened by the painful realization that I've committed the gravest error of my life. I've learned through harsh experience that choices carry consequences, some of which are irreversible. I've lost Jack, the man who loved me despite my imperfections and wanted to build a future together. Now, all that remains are the remnants of a marriage I've dismantled, and a guilt that will forever weigh on my conscience. Jack, I am deeply sorry for the pain I've inflicted upon you. I wish I could undo my actions, but all I can do now is accept the repercussions and strive to grow from my mistakes. I hope that someday you can find it within yourself to forgive me, even if we can never return to what we once had. I also want to express my gratitude to everyone who read my story and offered advice. Thank you. My hope is that you can learn from my mistakes and cherish those who truly love you, guarding against moments of weakness that could jeopardize the most precious aspects of your life.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
Hello, and thanks for checking out my post. I'm in a pretty unusual situation, and I'm curious if anyone else has experienced something similar. I'm not the one who's suffering here. It's my husband, kids, and parents who have to deal with the consequences of my past mistakes, and I'm truly sorry for that. To be direct, about 19 months ago, I got caught having an affair with a married neighbor who has 3 kids. I'm a 32-year-old woman, my husband is 39, and the neighbor, whom I'll call Steve for privacy, was 27 at the time. I messed up by starting this affair, which began a little over 2 years ago. Even though the affair went on for almost 5 months before we got caught, I was physically with Steve only 4 times in total. I know it's hard to believe, but I swear it's true. Now, let me address the questions about my marriage that I'm sure many of you have. Were we having problems? Did I not love my husband? Was I unhappy? The answer to all of these is a definite no. I was incredibly happy and content in my marriage, and I love my husband and our 2 boys, aged 9 and 11, more than anything in the world. Jim emotionally, mentally, and physically fulfilled me completely. He was everything I ever wished for and more. My attraction to Steve, which was in the wrong place, stemmed from a deep part of me that harked back to my first romantic encounter when I was 18. It was a wild attraction, much like that first time. During high school, I casually dated 4 boys, but nothing serious, just a quick kiss at the end of a date. In fact, I considered all of them as friends since we all grew up together. Then one day, I got invited to a barbecue at my friend's parents' place. That's where I met Charles, who happened to be my friend's cousin. The first time I laid eyes on him, I was captivated. At that time, he was 20 and I was 18. From the moment we met, we couldn't stop looking at each other. I can't explain it, but there was an undeniable attraction that pulled me to him like a magnet to metal. We struck up a conversation at the barbecue, but he had to leave for work, so we exchanged phone numbers. The following day, which was a Sunday, we met up for ice cream in the evening and took a walk. We talked for hours, completely engrossed in each other, and then we spontaneously started kissing. He invited me back to his apartment, and there I had my first intimate experience. It was like magic, even better than I had ever imagined. Something about Charles excited me in a way that made me want to give him every part of myself. Even today, I can't find the words to describe it. It was something subconscious and I couldn't resist it. Apart from the physical connection, we had absolutely nothing in common. In reality, we were not a good match. I ended things with Charles 11 months later, when the initial passion faded. A year after that, I met my now husband, Jim. While the initial spark wasn't as strong as it was with Charles, over time I developed a deep love for Jim that surpassed anything I had ever experienced. Jim met all my criteria, and I knew he was the one for me. We got married a year later, and our marriage brought us 13 years of happiness until I ruined it. We were blessed with 2 amazing boys who are the spitting image of their dad and have his wonderful personality. I've shared these details because they're relevant to why I started the affair with Steve. Steve and his wife, let's call her Marcia, moved into our neighborhood. They were the youngest couple in the community and were warmly welcomed by everyone. Interestingly, my husband and I were the second youngest couple, with the rest of our neighbors being in their 40s, 50s, and a few in their 60s. Steve and Marcia were invited to a neighborhood picnic, and it was there that he and I first made eye contact. Steve made sure we got a good deal from the salesman and secured great financing for us. During the closing process, Steve and I kept exchanging glances, though my husband didn't notice. A few days later, I had to take the vehicle back to the dealership to have mud flaps installed, and it was during that visit that Steve and I had our first inappropriate encounter. When he spotted me in the lounge, he came over to say hello. He then invited me to his office because he had some extra financing details to discuss. We sat down, got some coffee, and started talking, much like how I did with Charles. Out of the blue, he blurted out that he wanted to have a private conversation with me about his feelings. He mentioned feeling a strong connection and noticed that I was looking at him intensely. I admitted feeling something too, but knew it was wrong. He acknowledged that it was wrong but didn't care and expressed his desire for me. Fast forward to the next morning, we had our first intimate encounter at his house after our kids went to school and our spouses left for work. By the way, my husband Jim has a good job, and Marcia is a licensed practical nurse, LPN. As I mentioned, Steve and I only had physical relations 4 times during the entire 5-month period. There was absolutely no emotional connection between us because I loved Jim and Steve loved Marcia. What we had was purely physical, and I have to be honest, it didn't compare to what I had with my husband, not even close. However, it was forbidden, which made it thrilling and risky, I suppose. Looking back now, I think being a stay-at-home mom, Sam, for 11 years made me crave the attention I was receiving from this younger, attractive man. I thought I could have this secret adventure for a while and still maintain a loving and fulfilling marriage with my husband. All those thoughts came crashing down one Thursday morning 19 months ago. That's when Steve and I were discovered in bed at his house by Marcia's mother. She walked in on us while we were fully involved and immediately started shouting angrily. She slapped and scratched Steve across the face, leaving a deep gash with her nails. She also struck me on the jaw and forcefully pulled out chunks of my hair before I could grab my clothes and leave the house. When I got back to my own house, I was completely shocked by what had just happened, and the reality of my actions hit me hard. I realized that my perfect marriage with Jim was forever altered and could potentially end because of this. I sat silently for a couple of hours, just staring at the walls, wondering how I would break the news to my husband. Eventually, I decided to call him and left an urgent message. I told him that there was something very important I needed to discuss. He didn't respond, so I sent him a text but still got no reply. At that point, I suspected that Marcia or maybe even Steve had probably reached out to him. A few minutes later, Marcia and her mother arrived at our front porch, banging on the door and the bay window, screaming for me to answer. I didn't. They were yelling offensive words and insisting that they were aware I was inside, urging me to unlock the door. I felt intense fear and profound embarrassment. Thankfully, my kids were at school during all of this. Eventually, they departed and I lay down on the couch, shedding tears. I briefly drifted off to sleep and woke up when I heard a car door close in the driveway. I hurried to the bathroom to splash water on my face and check my appearance in the mirror before returning to the living room to greet him when he arrived. However, he didn't come inside. Instead, I saw through the window that he was walking down the street towards Steve and Marcia's house. I observed him as he headed there and spent almost 3 hours before returning home. When he got back, I tried to hug him, but he kept his distance. I began to apologize, but he informed me that he couldn't accept my apology and insisted that I leave immediately. I collapsed to the floor, sobbing and pleading, telling him I didn't want to go, but he remained firm. He then called my mother and informed her about my actions, asking her to come over and pick me up. My mom arrived, offered her apologies to Steve, and persuaded me to go back to her house for the night. She helped me gather some clothes, and I left while tearfully asking Jim how he would explain this to the kids. He assured me he would handle it, and I left, feeling heartbroken and ashamed. That night, I called Jim, and to my surprise, he answered. When he did, he simply greeted me and then fell silent. I identified myself and expressed my deep regret and the promise that I would never repeat such a mistake. I also pledged to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to him. Jim didn't respond and only inquired if I had anything else to say. I replied with a no and inquired about his feelings. He responded with, "You know how I feel?" and I began to cry. He then suggested that I stay at my parents' house for a couple of weeks before returning home. I agreed reluctantly, but asked when I could see him and the boys again. He replied that he didn't want to see me right now, but agreed to have a short phone call with me every evening at 9 p.m. Our first call ended with me saying, "I love you," and Jim simply hanging up without a response. The next night's call went the same way, with me apologizing and Jim remaining silent until I finished talking. Then he dropped a bombshell. He wanted a divorce. Hearing this devastated me, and I begged him for another chance. He refused and mentioned that he knew he would have to split his hard-earned assets in a divorce. However, in the next breath, he said he'd give me everything he owned if I would just vanish and leave him and the boys alone. I couldn't believe it and told him he didn't mean it, but he insisted that he did. We ended the call and I cried throughout the night. I began thinking of ways to make him stay and came up with a plan to offer him a postnuptial agreement that would heavily favor him, hoping he wouldn't refuse it. All I wanted was a second chance to prove my love to him, no matter the cost. During the following week, while Jim was consulting his divorce attorney, I was meeting with a divorce attorney myself, not to prepare for divorce, but to create a postnuptial agreement to present to Jim before receiving divorce papers. I visited 4 different attorneys before finding one who specialized in postnuptial agreements and was willing to craft such a one-sided agreement. It's a one-sided agreement because my husband would receive most of the benefits in exchange for staying married to me for a specific period, giving me a chance to rebuild our love. Unfortunately, Jim's attorney prepared the divorce papers in just 11 days, and I was served with them at my parents' house. 2 days later, I had Jim served with the proposed postnuptial agreement. We had a conversation that night after he read the proposal. He seemed somewhat surprised by what I had offered, and for the first time in the past 2 weeks, I sensed the caring person I once knew resurfacing, rather than the angry and emotionally distant man he had been. Financially and personally, this agreement is a clear win for Jim and an opportunity for me to demonstrate my value to him. I won't go into specific details about the postnuptial agreement, but I can confirm that it allows Jim to retain most of our marital assets if we remain married and living together for at least 30 months. Furthermore, if I were ever unfaithful again and we got a divorce, I would forfeit any claim on our marital assets, meaning I'd get nothing, and waive any entitlement to alimony or child support. The agreement also requires me to secure a full-time job within the next 6 months and start contributing to our household expenses. Lastly, it allows my husband the option to see other women if he wishes to during the remainder of our marriage. I know Jim would never cheat, it's just not in his nature. But I want him to know that I love him enough to give him this choice. To my surprise and happiness, Jim agreed to the offer, but with one extra condition. He wanted a clause stating that there's no requirement for us to be physically intimate or share marital intimacy for the rest of our marriage. I felt a bit sad and unsure about this, but I eventually agreed, because I believed that with time, I could regain his respect, trust, and passionate love. However, things haven't turned out the way I expected, and that's why I'm sharing this. We are now 17.5 months into what I call our second marriage, but our relationship feels more like we're housemates raising our kids. Don't get me wrong, I'm grateful every day for the second chance I've been given. But what we have doesn't really resemble a traditional marriage. It's more like 2 divorced individuals living together. Since my affair, Jim hasn't shown any affection towards me, none whatsoever, not even a simple kiss or hug. He won't let me get close to him for any kind of affection. Although I occasionally manage to sneak in a hug and kiss before he can block me, I can tell he doesn't like it, so I don't do it very often. Additionally, he insists that I undergo monthly at-home STD testing. Furthermore, since the affair, Jim refuses to go out in public with me, even to family gatherings. When our boys have games, we take turns attending. When it's my turn, Jim comes to the games but doesn't sit with me. Instead, he usually stands on the sidelines with other fathers and acts as if I'm not there. The only time we go out together is when we leave town or go on vacations, which we do quite frequently. Jim refuses to move from the neighborhood unless he receives a job promotion that requires him to relocate. If that doesn't happen, his plan is to stay in our current home until our boys finish high school. The boys also prefer not to move because all their friends live within a short distance from our house, and the same goes for Jim and his friends. Since the affair, I've lost all the friendships I had in our neighborhood. Steve and Marcia divorced 8 months after the D-Day, Discovery Day, but Marcia and her kids still reside in the same house down the street. The women in the neighborhood I used to be close to have essentially cut ties with me and hold me responsible for breaking up their family. Consequently, my home has become somewhat like a prison. When I'm here, I rarely go out front and mostly stay inside or in my backyard tending to my gardens. My boys are frequently out and about in the neighborhood, or they have their friends over at our house, including Marcia and Steve's kids. Fortunately, not much has changed in their world. Jim follows a similar routine. He's good friends with the neighborhood men. They either come over to our house where they enjoy cigars and bourbon on our back porch at night, or he's at one of their homes. Jim's daily routine typically involves going to work, hitting the gym, and then returning home. He prepares his own meals and rarely eats dinner with us. He refuses to eat anything I cook, although he did sneak a few cookies I made the other day. On weekends, he grills his own food and only eats what he cooks, avoiding my dishes. The weekday dinners I share with my boys have been a wonderful bonding experience for us. They prefer to eat shortly after coming home from school, so the three of us usually have dinner around 4 p.m. I have everything prepared, and they help set the table, assist with final food preparations, and pitch in with cleaning up after the meal. I truly value this time because it has brought us closer and taught them important life skills. They also lend a hand in the garden, where we've created a fantastic space in our backyard with landscaping. So, to sum it up, some aspects of my life are really positive, while others are quite challenging. I suppose this is a long way of asking whether you believe I should continue this marriage as it is, or if I should release Jim now and provide him with the financial benefits as if he had stayed with me. Deep down, I know he's not happy. How could he be? It's evident that he no longer sees me as his wife or lover but as a co-parent, which we both excel at, by the way. I love Jim deeply and will carry the burden of what I did to him for the rest of my life. I desire nothing more than to return to the loving relationship we once had, but I'm not sure he's willing to go there with us. Please let me know your thoughts on what I should do. I'd greatly appreciate any suggestions on how I can successfully regain my husband's love and trust after such a blatant betrayal. First update, 7 weeks later. I've returned to provide an update on my situation. Last month, I followed the advice of many of you and made the decision to move out of our house temporarily to give our marriage some space. I secured a short-term rental for a nicely furnished apartment nearby, and I've been living there ever since. While I do miss being in the same house as my husband and boys, along with my gardens, it has been somewhat of a relief to get away from that neighborhood. There are so many painful memories and negative vibes there, all of which I know are my fault. I'm not making excuses for what I've caused. When I informed Jim of my decision, he appeared surprised and somewhat saddened, asking numerous questions. His reaction conveyed a lot to me. It indicated that he still has feelings for me, and I could see it in his eyes. I pick up my boys after school, and they come to my place for dinner and spend the night a few days a week. Jim and I are flexible about this, and the kids are aware they can come and go as they please at either place. The main issue I'm facing now is that since I'm no longer at home, I don't get to see Jim very often. I'm also not in a position where I can talk to him in person, so I end up calling him with trivial questions multiple times a week just to stay in touch. We've had several lengthy conversations about various topics recently, which is another sign that he still cares for me. I know I still love him. That's all for now. Thank you, and take care. Final update. 5 months from the last update, I've held off on coming back to provide an update because I wanted to allow enough time to offer a comprehensive perspective on my situation. What a journey it has been. It's been a real roller coaster ride. Life certainly has its share of highs and lows. First, the downside. After 2 years into our second marriage, Jim made the decision that it would be best for us to get a divorce. Jim mentioned that while he still cares about me and may consider rekindling a romantic relationship in the future, he believes he can't do so while we're still legally married. I don't fully grasp what he means, but he explained that it's something psychological. He shared that as long as we remained married, he felt a sense of disrespect and betrayal. But after the divorce, he thinks he can let go of those feelings. He compared it to dating once more and assured me that we would go out to commemorate our divorce on the day it becomes final, possibly even spending the night together. I realize this might seem like an unusual way to divorce without guilt on his part, but I'm willing to go along with it if it means I can have this man in my life as my partner, lover, and friend. If we do reconnect, Jim made it clear that we will never remarry. He believes that if we genuinely love each other, a formal contract isn't necessary. I agree with that perspective, but I do wish there were a way for him to do this without divorcing me. Regarding the divorce itself, I'm voluntarily allowing him to retain 3/4 of our marital assets, even though he didn't fulfill the conditions outlined in the post-nuptial agreement. Additionally, I won't pursue alimony or child support from him. I understand that there may be women reading this who might criticize me for being so generous, but I believe he deserved the money, and he would have willingly given his entire fortune to me if I had remained faithful to him. I'm content with this choice. Even with the reduced settlement, I'll have the means to live comfortably for at least the next 8 years without needing to work, although I am currently employed, so my financial situation is even better now. In conclusion, I want to express my gratitude to those who responded to me. You have no idea how much your words influenced my decisions and helped me get through this challenging period. Before I conclude, I'd like to offer some advice to women who, like me, struggle with controlling temptation. My advice to you is simple. Resist. Don't give in. The excitement of the moment is not worth the risk. If you find it difficult to restrain yourself, consider seeking professional help. I can assure you, from personal experience, that the fleeting thrill is not worth the long-term loss of love, respect, and trust.